have evidence.
You don't have to have evidence of this point if one court after another. Your Honor, most of the courts, at least two-thirds, Your Honor, or just approximately anyway, two-thirds of all the judges that have looked at this issue before you have upheld the traditional, or would have upheld the traditional definition of marriage on this rationale. This rationale. And the plaintiffs say there is no way to understand why anyone would support Proposition 8 except through some irrational, dark motivation, some animus, some kind of bigotry. Your Honor, that is just not only a slur on 7 million Californians who supported Proposition 8, it is a slur on 70 out of 108 judges who have.
If you have got 7 million Californians who took this position, 70 judges, as you pointed out, and this long history that you have described, why in this case did you present but one witness on the subject? One witness. And I think it fair to say that his testimony was equivocal in some respects.
The defense in this case started with a long list of witnesses. But you see, it's easy for people who want to deprive gays and lesbians of their rights to make all kinds of statements in campaign literature or on TV where they can't be cross-examined. But when they have to come into court and defend those opinions under oath, well, initial depositions, their expert witnesses started having second thoughts. That included Dr. William Tam, one of the very men who worked to put Proposition 8 on the ballot in the first place. What is your relationship to the Traditional Family Coalition?
I am the executive director of Traditional Family Coalition.
All right, this is an email that you wrote on May 15th, 2008. Is that correct?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And the last sentence of this says, "We can't lose the battle for Proposition 8, or God's definition of marriage will be permanently erased in California." Now, was that your motivation for participating with ProtectMarriage.com in promoting Proposition 8?
The other reason is, I think it is very important that our children do not grow up thinking, fantasizing, or thinking about, should I marry Jane or John when I grow up?
Then you go on to say, what will be next? On their agenda list is legalizing having sex with children. And this was something that you were putting out in order to convince people to vote for Proposition 8. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And then the last sentence says, if sexual orientation is characterized as a civil right, then so would pedophilia, polygamy, and incest. Do you agree with that, sir?
Yes, I agree.
And that's what you were telling people in order to convince them to vote for Proposition 8. Is that correct?
Yes.
Let me go down to point 4, where you say that countries that legalized same-sex marriage saw alarming moral decline. You believe that after the Netherlands legalized same-sex marriage, the Netherlands went on after that to legalize incest and polygamy and... I mean, who told you that, sir?
It's in the internet.
In the internet. And you just put it out there to convince voters to vote for Proposition 8.
Yeah.
After his deposition, Dr. Cham chose to avoid the subpoenas compelling him to appear in court under oath. In effect, Dr. Tam went on the lam, refusing to testify. And after our depositions of their potential witnesses were complete, only two were still willing to testify. Their only remaining expert on marriage was a Mr. Blankenhorn.
Raise your right hand, please. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Mr. Blankenhorn, what is the primary purpose of marriage in human groups?
We're embodied as male and female. That's the basic division in the species. We reproduce sexually. In fact, the famous anthropologist Claude Levi-Strauss once described marriage as a social institution with a biological foundation. He was saying that across societies, that the man and the woman whose sexual union makes the child, that those same two individuals are also the social and legal parents of the child. And there is only one institution in the world that performs the task of bringing together the three dimensions of parenthood, the biological, the social, and the legal. That institution is marriage, because we know how important this is for children.
Very well. Mr. Boyce, you may cross-examine.
Well, all right. Let me try to make this as simple as I can. Have any of the scholars that you've said you relied on said that permitting same-sex marriage will cause a reduction in heterosexual marriages? That's yes, no, or I don't know.
Well, I know the answer. I cannot answer you correctly if the only words I'm allowed to choose from is yes or no. I can give you my answer in a very brief sentence.
If you know the answer, why don't you share it with us?
I would be happy to, but he's only permitting me to give yes and no. I cannot do that and be accurate.
He is giving you three choices. Yes, no, I don't know.
But I do know. I do know the answer.
Then is it yes or is it no?
Your Honor, I can answer the question, but I cannot give an accurate answer if the only two choices I have are yes and no. If you give me a sentence, I can answer it. So one sentence is all I'm asking for.
All right, let's take a sentence. One sentence.
Can you ask me the question again, please?
Yes. Have any of the scholars who you say you relied on asserted that they believe permitting same-sex marriage will result in a reduction in the heterosexual marriage rate?
My answer is that I believe that some of the scholars I have cited have asserted that permitting same-sex marriage would contribute to the deinstitutionalization of marriage, one of the manifestations of which would be a lower marriage rate among heterosexuals, but I do not have sure knowledge that in the exact form of words you are asking me for, they have made the direct assertion that permitting same-sex marriage would directly lower the marriage rate among heterosexuals.
Mr. Blankenhorn.
That wasn't that long.
Questions and answers.
If I were to take that as an I don't know, would that be fair?
Well, with respect, Your Honor, I would disagree with you. I know exactly my answer to this question, and I have just stated it, and I would be happy to restate it.
The record is clear on what you said.
Your Honor, if you will, I want to address the issue of whether or not there is a legitimate basis for people to be concerned that redefining the traditional understanding of marriage presents any basis for concern about the harm that may result. But before analyzing this, I think we have to begin with two propositions. The first one is that redefining the institution will change the institution. And I think Mr. Blankenhorn really summed it up quite well.
It's impossible to be completely sure about a prediction of future events. But I do have a great deal of confidence in the likelihood of the weakening of marriage through the process of deinstitutionalization to a greater degree than would be the case otherwise. If you change the definition of the thing, it's hard to imagine how it could have no impact on the thing. So while I don't think anyone here can say that they know from scientific study that they know with absolute certainty that this will happen, I sincerely believe that this is this is a likely outcome, a likely result of adopting same-sex marriage.
And when you say, based on the scholars that have studied this, that's because you're simply repeating the things that these scholars say. You're just a transmitter of the findings of these scholars. Is that correct?
Now you're putting words in my mouth.
No, sir.
Yes, sir. I was simply trying to report the view of some scholars that I was basing my arguments on. I'm saying there are scholars, respected scholars, who have made this argument based on ethnographic research, and I've read them, and that's the basis for my assertion.
Your Honor, could I ask this witness be instructed to listen to the question, answer my question, and not make a statement that is not responsive to the question, even if he believes it's important?
I don't need such instruction. My intention is to do exactly that.
Mr. Blankenhorn, one of the instructions that the court gives to the jury when an expert witness testifies is to consider the witness's background, training, and all the other evidence in the case. And that other evidence includes the demeanor of the witness. So I would urge you to pay close attention to Mr. Boyce's questions and to answer them directly, succinctly. So bear that in mind.
Yes, sir, I will.
I'm really just addressing whether I was putting words in your mouth. If you look at page 300, lines 7 through 12, you said that you were basing your analysis on the work of highly regarded scholars, and then you say...
Okay, I got you a moment. I used the word, I'm a transmitter of findings of eminent scholars. Gotcha.
No, that's not a gotcha. I'm just trying to...
Okay. I said transmitter 7 months ago in a deposition.
And what you meant there was that you weren't making these conclusions on your own. You were simply repeating what these scholars had to say. Is that correct?
If I may say so in my own words?
Let me look at your own words. Let's look at your own words. Page 300. I am simply repeating things that they say. I can assure you these are not my own conclusions. I'm a transmitter here of findings. Of findings of these eminent scholars. Did you give that testimony at your deposition?
That's what I said at the deposition.
Your Honor, you will not find anywhere in the pages of history, nowhere, any suggestion that the traditional definition of marriage across cultures, across time, had anything whatever to do with homosexuality. Had nothing to do with it.
You heard Mr. Olson this morning recount the background of the Loving decision by the Supreme Court in 1967. And up to that time, numerous states had laws on the books which prohibited interracial marriage. Why are we not at that same tipping point here with respect to same-sex marriage?
Your Honor, several reasons. Among the most important is this. What legitimate purpose of marriage recognized historically or anywhere else provided a rational basis for the state of Virginia to say that an interracial couple could not get married? It certainly wasn't core procreative purpose.
Excuse me for interrupting, but you recall the rationale that was used by the courts was that the mixing of the races would have serious corrosive effects on society.
Your Honor, those racist sentiments and policies had no foundation in the historical purpose of marriage, and in fact, they actually made people have illegitimate children, illegitimate, natural children, which again was the purpose of marriage, as Justice Stevens says, is to license cohabitation and produce legitimate children. As the Eighth Circuit said, Your Honor, only opposite-sex couples can procreate naturally, and therefore it is only opposite-sex couples who uniquely address this fundamental historic...
But you don't draw any distinction between the state's interests where an opposite-sex couple have had to require some form of intervention in order to produce children. The state's interest is exactly the same, is it not?
Your Honor, not. They are not quite the same, no.
Well, then what's the difference?
I really think the state's main concern, or certainly among the state's main concerns in regulating marriage and in seeking to channel naturally procreative sexual conduct into stable and enduring unions, is to minimize what I call irresponsible procreation. It's not a good term, but I can't think of a more serviceable one, and that is procreation that isn't bound by social norms and that often leads to children being raised by one parent or the other, or sometimes neither parent.
And my point was that there are a number of heterosexual couples who do not naturally procreate, who require the intervention of some third party or some medical assistance of some kind.
Yes, Your Honor, and it is not those opposite-sex couples either that the state is concerned about in terms of the threats to society and the concerns that society has from irresponsible procreation.
Why don't those same values you have described apply to lesbian couples and gay couples? Coming together, supporting one another, providing love, comfort, and support for one another. Why don't all of those considerations apply just as much to the plaintiffs here as they apply to John and Jane Doe?
Your Honor, I want to conclude this piece of my argument by calling the court's attention to a case from the 11th Circuit called Lofton. It was a case in which the 11th Circuit upheld a Florida statute that prohibited gay adoptions. Taking all of this available information into account, the legislature could rationally conclude that a family environment with married, opposite-sex parents remains the optimum social structure in which to bear children, and that the raising of children by same-sex couples presents an alternative structure for child rearing that has not yet proven itself to be as optimal as the biologically based marriage.
I'd like to ask you something. Why should Mr. Blankenhorn's testimony be admitted? Does he meet the Daubert standard?
His professional life for 20 years has been devoted to the study of one subject, the subject of marriage. He's written 2 books on this subject.
Are they peer-reviewed?
I think the Ninth Circuit standards for qualifying an expert are particularly liberal, and I don't think that they